Have you ever asked yourself, why do you keep falling for the wrong person, over and over again? You might be smart, kind, someone with standards. You may have even learned how to love yourself, let go of past wounds. And yet, you love again, and you hurt again. You give your all to someone only to one day whisper to yourself, I don't understand why I ever chose them. Carl Jung, the psychologist who saw the soul as a map of the cosmos, offered a startling answer. You didn't fall in love with that person. You fell in love with an image buried in your soul, one you've never even known by name. That image is the anima, if you're a man, the animus, if you're a woman. It is the archetype of the inner opposite, a forgotten longing, a shadowed ideal, an unlived part of the soul. In this video, you won't just understand why your heart keeps repeating the same painful love stories. You'll also discover what the anima and animus are, and why they govern your romantic life more than any logic ever could, why you keep falling for the wrong person without knowing it, how to love without losing yourself, and most importantly, how to reconnect with the first soul you ever forgot to love, yourself. This is not just a video about psychology. This is a return from the illusions we've called love, toward the awakening we've always longed for, wholeness. Maybe you've been there before. You meet someone, and the world seems to stop. You can't explain it. You can't control it. They appear like magic, like the missing piece, a soul connection you're sure the universe sent. And you fall, hard, deeply. You tell yourself, this time it's real. But then, it all crumbles. You're left confused. How did it go so fast, so wrong? The person who once felt so familiar now seems like a stranger. And you begin to wonder, am I cursed in love? Or is there something broken in me I can't see? Carl Jung explained, one that's difficult to hear but deeply liberating. You didn't fall in love with them. You fell in love with your own anima or animus projected onto that person. You weren't loving a real person. You were loving a psychic image your soul had idealized. In every man's unconscious, there exists an inner image of the feminine, the anima. In every woman's unconscious, an image of the masculine, the animus. These are not actual people. They are symbolic composites, woven from memories, dreams, emotions, and stories gathered from a very young age, from your mother or father, from fairy tales, from movies, from old desires left unexpressed. Anima and animus don't speak in words, they speak in symbols. And when you meet someone who resembles that symbol just slightly, they ignite. Suddenly, you are not yourself. You are possessed, not by love, but by the force of an archetype. Jung described this as a kind of spiritual possession. A part of your soul, still unconscious, seeks to come alive by living through another person. You're not loving to connect. You're loving to meet the unknown part of yourself through the mirror of someone else. Why do animus relationships so often end in heartbreak? Because no real person can forever sustain the weight of a projection. No one can play the role of savior goddess or spiritual knight without eventually collapsing. When they begin to reveal their real selves, their flaws, their selfishness, their humanity, you feel betrayed. Not because they failed you, but because your inner anima or animus has quietly withdrawn. Carl Jung called this the collapse of projection. In that moment, you realize, I wasn't in love with them. I was in love with a hidden part of me. I was searching for something my soul had forgotten and expecting someone else to embody it. The question, then, is no longer, how can I love the right person? But rather, what part of my unconscious am I projecting onto the person I think I love? Anima and animus are not your enemies. They are sacred messengers, symbols of your unlived soul. They are fragments of yourself, longing to be known. The key is not to suppress them, nor to chase them blindly. The key is to call them back home, to befriend them, so they stop running your love life from the shadows. In the next section, we'll dive deeper into Anima, the soul woman inside every man, Animus, the inner voice inside every woman, and how both shape the way we love, live, idealize, and eventually how we grow. Because love doesn't begin when you meet the perfect partner. It begins when you reunite with the forgotten opposite within your soul. You may think that as a man, you know exactly who you are. You're strong, rational, stable, reserved, not easily shaken. Love is love. Breakups happen. You move on. And surely, you're the one choosing who to love, not being led by some unseen force. Unfortunately, Jung would disagree. In the unconscious of every man, whether he's a boxer, a CEO, a software engineer, or a TikTok creator with 2 million followers, there exists a very specific image of a woman. Not his ex, not his mother, not the woman quoting Indian philosophy in this morning's podcast, but a she who lives deep in his soul, a symbolic presence, ancient and mysterious, that Jung called the anima. Who is the anima? In simplest terms, the anima is the inner woman within a man's psyche, an image he often doesn't know he's carrying. You can recognize her by certain unmistakable signs. When you meet a woman and suddenly your heart swells with a movie soundtrack playing in the background. When a smile feels eerily familiar, like you've known her in another life. When you fall too fast, too hard, too deep, and even you question why. That's not love, that's the anima. And what you've met is not just a person. You've met a projection of your own soul, wearing someone else's face. The anima doesn't deceive you, but she entraps you, gently. Not out of malice. Her purpose is not to make you happy in a relationship. Her purpose is to awaken the feminine within your own soul. And her most effective method? To trigger a storm of passion, longing, confusion, and heartbreak until you have no choice but to ask, who am I really in love with? The anima is built from the first woman you knew, your mother, the touch you received, or didn't, when you cried, the lullabies or anger you heard as a child, the female characters in fairy tales, cartoons, and myths, the emotions you were never allowed to express, the creative, sensitive, intuitive parts of you suppressed to be a real man. The anima is not just your ideal woman. She is every unfelt feeling, every unlived softness, every silenced inner voice. And now, she wants to be seen. What happens when you don't know she exists? You fall in love. And you fall deeply, but without knowing who's doing the falling. You meet someone, and suddenly, her eyes, her voice, the way she tilts her head, matches 80% of the image you've been unconsciously carrying. The match is made. Jung called this projection the act of taking your anima and placing her onto a real person. And of course, neither of you knows this is happening. All you know is, I've never felt this way before. She makes me want to change my life. She must be the one, the only one. The falling phase. When you're not loving someone, you're addicted to a feeling. At this point, logic is offline. You're not choosing to love. You're being loved through. The anima pulls you into a myth. She is the muse. She understands me. She heals me. She's from my childhood dreams. Your mind begins to chant mantras like, I've never felt this depth with anyone. She's the only one who makes me feel alive. This must be fate, destiny, maybe even my future wife. But eventually, the spell breaks. One day she says the wrong thing, or she talks too closely with a male coworker, or she simply acts human. The collapse begins, the projection shatters, the anima withdraws, and the person in front of you now seems ordinary, flawed, real. You feel lost, angry, disappointed. You think she changed, but she didn't change. You just woke up from your anima. Anima doesn't have just one face. She shapeshifts, layer upon layer like an onion, except instead of making you cry from the sting, she makes you weep from a forgotten longing deep within. Carl Jung observed that the anima evolves through 4 stages of development, each corresponding to a different type of woman men are unconsciously drawn to, depending on their level of inner maturity. 1. Eve, the instinctual anima. She's the primal woman, emotional, nurturing, sensual, instinctive. This is why many men feel magnetized by women who are raw, free-spirited, uncontainable, like they carry a wildlife force the man himself lacks. You'll hear phrases like, "I don't know why, but I'm just drawn to her. She feels alive. When I'm with her, I feel something primal, like I've returned to myself." Warning: these relationships are often intensely passionate, physical, chaotic, and hard to escape. 2. Helen, the cultural anima. She's the ideal woman of the collective imagination, intelligent, alluring, stylish, successful. She walks like a perfume ad or an Instagram aesthetic feed. She makes you feel upgraded. Next to her, you feel elevated, like society is clapping every time you post a photo together. Jung noted, "At this stage, a man is not truly in love. He is in love with himself, through the reflection of others." 3. Mary, the spiritual anima. Now the anima becomes deeper, no longer just emotion or status. She becomes meaning. You want to share dreams with her, talk about the soul, discuss purpose, dive into the metaphysical. She becomes the soulmate, not of romance, but of inner resonance. The one who gets you, signs. You start journaling more, listening to spiritual podcasts, and thinking, if I lose her, I'll lose a piece of my soul. 4. Sophia, the guiding anima. This is the highest stage. The anima is no longer someone you fall in love with. She becomes a guide, a light, an inner teacher. She shows up in dreams, not as sexual, not even romantic, but as a sacred presence. She appears during meditation, in moments of silence, as a symbol of wisdom and transformation. Sophia is the result of inner integration, when you no longer project the anima onto women around you, but begin to relate to her as a living presence within. Most relationship pain happens when you're stuck in stage 1 or 2. You fall in love because the feeling is so intense, because she makes me feel like a man, because the chemistry is unreal. You call it soulmates. Jung calls it an immature anima plus strong projection equals repeating heartbreak. The less you're conscious of the anima, the more she controls you. It's like wearing a VR headset and not knowing you're in a simulation. You think, this person is destiny. But it's your anima broadcasting. Please notice me. Stop projecting me onto others. You don't know it yet. But the person you think you're in love with is a fragmented piece of your soul. The solution is not to avoid love. It's to call the anima back home. Don't leave her out in the world entangled in romantic drama. Invite her in, as a friend, a muse, a sacred symbol. How? Write about the women you've loved. Reflect on patterns in your romantic history. Pay attention to female figures in your dreams. Ask, what does she represent in me that I have not lived out? Once you integrate the anima, you stop chasing the muse out there. You begin to create with more clarity, feel with more depth, trust your intuition, love without attachment. You see the real woman, without the anima-colored lens. You love from awareness, not from unconscious longing. There's a certain kind of voice many women hear in their minds, not from the world outside, but from somewhere deep within. A cold, rational, slightly superior voice. It sounds intelligent, even authoritative. It says things like, I'm not good enough. No one could truly love someone like me. Be independent. Be strong. Don't show weakness. Falling in love too fast is foolish. That kind of deep love only exists in movies. That's not your voice. That's the animus. And he's speaking. What is the animus? In every woman's unconscious, there lives an image of the masculine, not a specific man, but a psychic archetype. Carl Jung called it the animus, the inner masculine presence in the female psyche. If the anima in men symbolizes emotion, intuition, and soul, then the animus represents logic, order, judgment, and abstract thinking. Here's the problem. If you don't recognize that the animus is speaking, you'll believe every thought in your mind is the truth. When the animus is immature, he's not a kind and wise gentleman. He's a pessimistic professor, a well-dressed tyrant of reason. He shows up in harsh self-criticism disguised as just being rational, perfectionism in being the ideal modern woman, independent, strong, flawless, emotionally invulnerable, romantic obsessions with people who don't exist, like fictional artists, dead poets, anime characters. Jung said, when the animus is repressed, women become too feminine on the outside, but internally dominated on the inside. You might appear soft, warm, and gentle, but within, there's a man with a microphone, constantly issuing commands, logic, impossible standards, and silent contempt for real men. The result? You no longer love real men. You love the idea of a man. And when you meet an actual man, you compare, feel disappointed, or try to fix him to match the fantasy. A simple example. You meet a kind man. He's gentle, emotionally available, and grounded. At first, you think, this could work. But 3 days later, you're bored, uninspired. Why? Because he doesn't match your inner fantasy. He's not dark enough, deep enough, brooding enough, not a tortured poet with hidden wounds and mystical eyes, not the mysterious archetype your animus has installed as the standard. So the question is, are you truly loving him, or are you loving the voice of your animus that sets impossible standards? The animus comes in many forms. Not all of them are trustworthy. Jung identified 4 stages of animus development. Each one reflects the kind of man a woman is unconsciously drawn to, until she begins to integrate him consciously. Tarzan, the muscular animus, the primal protector, the strong, silent type. She desires a man who makes her feel safe, often rugged, dominant, a little dangerous. Love here is passionate and physical, but often volatile. Orpheus, the emotional animus. Now she falls in love with sensitivity. He's a musician, a poet, a dreamer. He listens, he cries, he feels deeply, but often he's also lost, unstable, unable to hold ground. Love here feels addictive, intoxicating, but lacks foundation. Logos, the intellectual animus, the philosopher, the intellectual, the deep man. She's drawn to thinkers, those who quote Jung, talk about meaning, and seem to understand the cosmos. The problem? She might be in love with her internal monologue, not the man across the table. Hermes, the transformative animus. This is the highest form. The animus is no longer projected onto men. He becomes an inner guide, a mentor, a wisdom figure, a bridge to the deeper self. At this level, she no longer seeks a man to complete her. She listens to the animus within, without being possessed by him. You don't need a perfect man. You need to understand your animus, because true love cannot happen when you are in love with an image, are trying to mold men to match an inner fantasy, are unconsciously ruled by an archetype you haven't made conscious, when you call the animus back when you make peace with him. You begin to meet real men from a place of inner wholeness. And now, we arrive at the deepest truth Jung ever said about love. Real love isn't the harmony of 2 people. It's the inner alchemy when anima and animus no longer fight in the shadows, but are united in the light of the self. You've probably heard it 1,000 times. To truly love someone, you must first love yourself. It's so overused that it almost sounds meaningless, like a wellness cliché or a line from a water bottle label. But Carl Jung wouldn't say that. He'd say, To truly love someone, you must first reconcile the two archetypal forces in your unconscious, anima and animus. Why? Because if these inner figures are not made conscious, they will direct your romantic life from the shadows, like hidden directors writing your love story while you're the lead actor holding no script. You think you're loving someone, but you're reenacting a pattern that was written long before you met them. You think they abandoned you, but it's the collapse of a projection that forces you to return to the part of yourself you've never integrated. The sacred marriage, Mysterium Coniunctionis. In ancient symbolism and mythology, there is a sacred union, not between two people in the world, but between opposites within the soul. Jung called it Mysterium Coniunctionis, the sacred mystery of union, not a marriage between a man and a woman, but between anima and animus. This is the moment when a man stops chasing the divine muse outside and begins relating to his emotions, intuition, and creative depth within. A woman stops searching for the man who saves her, or the philosopher prince, and begins trusting her inner authority, logic, and spiritual insight. Love no longer becomes projection. It becomes presence. You no longer love to be completed. You no longer love to be defined. You no longer love to be rescued. You love because you are whole, and you wish to share that wholeness. Carl Jung once said, "Real love is the meeting of two souls, each having journeyed deeply through the darkness of their being. That's why real love is not easy, and not quickly. It asks you to see the psychological patterns you've projected onto others. Forgive yourself for loving the wrong people, not because you were foolish, but because you didn't yet understand what was driving your choices. Stop trying to change others, and start understanding your own anima or animus. So what can you do? 1. Practice awareness over reaction. When you find yourself falling too fast, pause. Ask, what part of this person is awakening something in me? What does that say about the part of me I haven't lived out? 2. Write letters to your anima or animus. Yes, it sounds silly, but it's powerful. Write what they're saying. Let them speak. You'll be surprised by the wisdom your unconscious is carrying, waiting for an invitation. 3. Remember, the one who takes your breath away may not be the one meant to stay. Intensity is not always the truth. Sometimes, it's just an archetype in motion. Learning to distinguish between an archetypal pull and a real connection is one of the most essential life skills Jung could offer you. And then, something magical happens. When anima and animus stop fighting, when they stop hijacking your love life with old patterns, you become free. And paradoxically, it's when you no longer need love to feel whole that you begin to attract love that's real. Carl Jung foresaw this. We are not saved by the people we fall in love with. We are saved when we reconcile with the unloved parts of ourselves. So if you want a healthy, mature, peaceful relationship, don't go looking out there. Look within. Perhaps your anima is writing poetry in your subconscious. Perhaps your animus is sitting cross-legged saying, "You need to understand me." And if you sit long enough, still enough, honestly enough, you'll hear them whisper, "It's time to get married, not to someone else, but between the parts of your soul you've always split in two." You're not falling in love with the wrong people. You've just never fully loved the right parts of yourself. And if you've made it this far, something inside you is awakening. That soft, steady voice saying, "I'm not crazy. I've just never been taught how my heart works." You're not foolish for falling. You're human. You were looking for the forgotten pieces of your soul in other people, but now you know their names, anima, animus, and you can invite them back in, not to possess you, but to integrate, so you can love others from a place of peace, not longing. In this world, many loves may come and go, but one love will stay, the love for your integrated self, when you are no longer the victim of the archetype, but the conscious navigator of your soul. If this video has touched you, leave a comment, not for the algorithm, but for your soul to speak its truth. Share this with someone you once loved wrong, or someone you're still learning to love right. And don't forget, the one you've been searching for all along, they're not out there. They've been waiting for you, within. Light through shadows, where we don't run from the dark but learn to walk through it. And sometimes true love begins right there.